Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storytellers Show. And today, our very special show with Nordic Visionaries, where we are exploring and talking to some of the change makers and thought leaders and really brilliant minds in the Nordics today about this crucial intersection of innovation and sustainability. And that's why I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest today, Bjarke Ingels, who is the founder of Big. Now, if you don't know Big, you're going to get an earful today, and you are going to come out of this conversation a changed individual, because we are going to look at what gives innovation and sustainability form. So Bjarke Ingels Group in 2005, after co-founding Plot Architects in 2000 and working at OMA in Rotterdam, founded Big. Bjarke believes that the architectural profession is best explained with the traditional Danish word for design, form giving. As the name suggests, it literally means giving form. When you design something, you give form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, you are giving form to the future. And I think as innovators, that's what most of us are trying to do each day. When you design a space, or a building or a city, you're giving form to the world that you would want to find yourself living in today and in the future. And that's why I'm so excited to have Bjarke here, who's going to talk to us more about that. But first, let me give you a little bit more background on my very special guest today. He has been named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. Bjarke is involved in designing and building public institutions, neighborhoods, and cities worldwide, including the Prague Philharmonic, the Chinese National Natural History Museum in Beijing, the Zurich Airport, the Woven City in Japan, and the Galefu Mindfulness City in Bhutan. He is working with NASA and Icon Technologies to design the first permanent human habitat on the moon. Bjarke is a Knight of the French Order des Arts and a Knight of the Danish Order of Dannebrog. In 2021, he was made a member of the EU's new European Bauhaus high-level roundtable, and since 2023, he has served as an advisor to the King of Bhutan. He is an honorary fellow by the AIA and the RIBA and the RAIC. Bjarke has won numerous awards, including the Venice Biennale's Golden Lion, the French Academy of Architecture's Gold Medal, and the Aga Khan Award, and the Louis Icon Memorial Award. The Wall Street Journal recognized Bjarke as Innovator of the Year in 2011, the same year he received the Danish Crown Prince Couples Culture Prize. I'm just absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today, Bjarke. Thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you. I'm happy to be here, and well done on plowing through all that stuff.
well done for having accomplished it. Reading it was the easiest part. Doing it was the much harder part. So, Bjarke, you are a visionary in all things architecture, but clearly that encompasses so many other disciplines in order to see a grander vision for what is here in the present today. So can you take us back a little bit to a younger you and tell us how this desire for form giving and creating structure began in your own life as a young person? Where did all of this inspiration come from?
Yeah, like not to go all the way back to Adam and Eve, but when I was a kid, I loved drawing. And I wanted to be a graphic novelist.
Wow.
And when I graduated from high school, there was no cartoon academy in Copenhagen, but we did have the art school, and the art school had sculpture, painting, and architecture. So, and this was right before the computers had taken over the world in a way. So the first 2 years of architecture school involved a lot of drawing. So my thinking was, and also education is free in Denmark. So you can be a little bit more, I don't know, frivolous with your experimentation. So I thought maybe spend a couple of years getting good at drawing backgrounds, essentially buildings and landscapes. And then sort of once I had a bearing, maybe get back to doing graphic novels. And then I fell in love with the background, with buildings.
Yeah. So, but kind of by accident, right? You were just doing this as a skills building exercise and it wound up turning into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can say architecture it's not about representing the world. It is about fabricating the world. It is essentially about creating the framework for the life we want to live. You can say if graphic novels are creating the framework to tell a story of a life, architecture is really the framework for our life's story. So in that sense, it's maybe just almost like migrating my ambition from fantasy into reality.
Yeah. But as an anthropologist, right, so much of the work that you do is taking culture into account, but you're not just taking current culture in, you're fast forwarding into future culture, which I find so fascinating about your designs. When I was looking at the design of the Galefu airport, for example, you can see its textile come to life. And yet it is this forward thinking apparatus, right? That we will go through. Who knows if there will even be airplanes in it in the future, right? It might be a whole other, a whole other form of transportation that we take from this place. But it's amazing how you're able to transform something that feels so ancient into something so futuristic. Can you talk a little bit about that innovation process happening in your mind?
Yeah, but I would say I think the airport for the Galefu Mindfulness City is in many ways tackling a lot of the things I think we've been trying to address for the last quarter of a century. But maybe first of all, life is always evolving. I mean, Darwin taught us that, and actually my son to my side here is called Darwin, because I do think that Charles Darwin is one of the best thinkers at describing how things take shape or how things are given form through his theory of evolution. But let's say when life evolves, when society evolves, the solutions that we created in the past to accommodate life, they may no longer fit. So that whenever we start a project, we try to listen and look and learn how has life evolved, how has society evolved, how has travel evolved, or depending on who we're designing for and where, trying to understand where is the world going, and as it evolves, as our ways of living and working and traveling and learning change, the solutions of the past may no longer fit, and therefore there is a requirement, there's a demand, there's a need to not restrain life into the solutions of the past, but actually to open up and allow the world we're building to accommodate where life is going. So that's why we don't necessarily always just repeat the good solutions from the past. And then secondly, because you're mentioning Bhutan. Bhutan is we've been charged with not only the airport, but actually creating the urban master plan and the kind of framework and vision for an entire new city on the border to India.
Wow.
And Bhutan is a country that is very successful in that it's one of the most sustainable countries in the world. It sequesters twice as much carbon as it emits. It's powered by the rivers, like hydroelectricity, so renewable energy. It has 80% forest cover. 60% of it is like baked into national legislation. They measure their success as a nation in gross national happiness. So there's a lot to celebrate. But at the same time, they're experiencing that the younger generations are migrating to Australia or Canada in pursuit of economic opportunity.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
the charge is, can we create a special administrative region, like a new city on the border to India, that is capable of inviting in foreign investment, foreign skills to retain local talent, but to do so in a way that doesn't displace the nature, but enhances it, that doesn't displace the local culture, but actually grows from it. And for the airport, which is essentially the first and last impression you'll get of a country or a city, we thought we need to capture that set of values from the get-go. So the airport is designed, it is sort of modular, made out of mass timber, locally sourced timber. It has like a series of pitched roofs. So it's sort of modular. So like typically airports end up becoming Frankensteins of different terminals that have been patched together over time. Here it can actually grow organically over time to increase capacity. And it produces a sort of stylized image of a mountain range, if you like, with the different pitched peaks. However, when you go closer, the mass timber is carved by the local craftsmen. And one of the things that makes Bhutan such a striking and beautiful place to visit is that they still have many vocational schools where they educate wood carvers and artists, painters, masons, sculptors. So what would be a pastiche or some kind of reference to the past in another place is here the living, breathing culture of the country. So it dawned on us, and this is like, I've been going to Bhutan many times over the last 2 years, and slowly but surely it infiltrated my heart and mind. And I understood that instead of this like more, I don't know, contemporary Scandinavian, austere, simple aesthetic that we were moving towards, it could only become truly Bhutanese and truly contemporary Bhutanese if we would invite the wood carvers to help adorn the superstructure for the airport. So in that sense, it ends up feeling like a very contemporary piece of infrastructure, an airport, but that is somehow grown out of the local heritage and culture. And in a way, so we called it ancient future, this idea that you can only be truly visionary about the future if you are growing from a place deeply rooted in the past.
And in hindsight now, is this how you feel about other projects as well, of that deep rootedness while projecting into the future? When you look back on some of your other projects, is that an ethos that has been part of your work?
Yeah, but I think a lot of our work is, you can say, like in some way, architecture and design is about creating something extraordinary out of the ordinary. It's taking the everyday aspects of everyday life and orchestrating them in such a way that they allow for the maximum unfolding of life, in a way to create poetry out of all the practicalities of your daily life. So in that sense, a lot of our work tries to take these very quotidian aspects of life, to celebrate the meaningful in the mundane. Our first project was the Copenhagen harbor bath that celebrated the fact that the water in Copenhagen port had become so clean you could swim in it. And it's a very simple project. It had a budget of $1 million. We had 4 or 5 months to do it. It's incredibly simple. It's essentially a floating wooden deck in the water.
Yeah.
But when it opened and you saw the Copenhageners jumping into the water in the middle of the city, it became quite clear that something special was happening. They didn't have to drive for hours to get to the Danish equivalent of the Hamptons. They could actually jump in the port in the middle of the city. And I thought this is maybe part of a bigger idea, that the clean port is not only nice for the fish, it's amazing for the citizens that live in that city. And we called it hedonistic sustainability, that the sustainable city or building not only is better for the environment, it can also be much more enjoyable for the people that live in it. And in that sense, we created the Copenhagen, which is the cleanest waste to energy power plant in the world. So clean that the steam coming out of the chimney is actually cleaner than the air of Copenhagen. So we could turn the facade into the tallest man-made climbing wall in the world. We could turn the roof into an alpine park where you can hike and picnic and ski, downhill skiing in a country that doesn't have any mountains except this one, which is a man-made one that turns the waste of the city into district heating and electricity. So in that sense, in a way, taking these everyday elements like a waste management facility or a waste to energy power plant or a kind of a harbor bath and making them in such a thoughtful way that they, in a way, elevate the mundane into something meaningful.
And this focus, I mean, how much do you attribute your playing with nature, your thinking about sustainability and transforming, right? Even just how we think about the water in our own hometown, right? Just what's been around us, and we knew maybe as children to be dirty and polluted, to suddenly become this clean place. How much does nature and sustainability play into your own design each time you sit down to create a new structure?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things to say, but if we take the sustainability part first, like sustainability is really a kind of holistic mindset. It's about trying to think not just about the possibilities today, but also the possibilities of future generations. That in a way, you want to design the world in such a way that all the good things you put into it can be sustained over time. So it's about thoughtfulness. It's about eliminating wastefulness, but it's actually not about not spending energy, because if you look at the last 200 years, 200 years ago, we were almost only burning wood, and there was like a water mill and a windmill here and there, but we were mostly fueling our welfare with burning wood. And then we discover coal and oil and gas. And of course, now we have an increasing amount of renewables. But when you look at that kind of increase in access to energy, it also delivers one of the greatest leaps in quality of life in every continent of the world. Life expectancy, infant mortality, prosperity in all kinds of ways. And I like to remind people that the only things in the world that don't spend energy are dead things. All living things harvest resources from the environment and use those resources to sustain them. So spending energy is a good thing. Wasting energy, of course, is a bad thing. Wasting materials is a bad thing. And of course, we have to be thoughtful about where do we source this energy. So that's one thing. So in that sense, I'm just saying sustainability is not it shouldn't, I mean, we don't build buildings to be sustainable. We build buildings to sustain life. And of course, we have to do this in a way that can be sustained for future generations. And then secondly, the thing about nature that I find so fascinating, I mean, I live in New York City. So I'm in my office and on the top floor here, but you can see like I have a beautiful garden. Actually, the vines outside have climbed into my ceiling. And
fantastic.
It happened during COVID, and the doors still open. They just climbed through the. Let me see. I think maybe it's gonna adjust. It happened during COVID, and I just let them stay, because to have this house guest or cohabitant really makes my home a better place. And one of the things that I find so rejuvenating about nature is that a city is a man-made environment. So it is very coded that you walk on the sidewalk, you cross the street at the crosswalk, you can sit on a bench, but you're not supposed to walk on the grass in the park. And like it has all these rules and regulations. Whereas when you go into nature, if you have the fitness for it, you can climb the rocks, you can climb the trees, you can try to wade over the river, or you can swim in it if you can swim. So in that sense, the environment is more inviting and more interactive. And I think a major part of our work is that we try to bring some of that invitation into the man-made environment. So like a power plant where you can climb the facade and ski on the roof, or we designed the home of the Lego brick. You can say it's a kind of museum, but it's almost like a cloud of overlapping rooms where light can pass in between them. You can enter it from all sides. So there's a square underneath where light seeps between the rooms above, and you're welcome there without a ticket. And you can climb the roofs of the buildings. It's a series of interconnected playgrounds where you are literally welcome to walk on the roof of the Lego house, also without a ticket. So that in some way, even in this case, it's not full of trees. The trees are on the ground, but it has the invitation and the uncodedness that you will otherwise find in nature. So I think in that sense, since architecture is about giving form to the world that we want to live in, if each time we contribute or add to that man-made world, if we make it, as inviting and as engaging and as inclusive as nature can be, then we're gently moving the man-made world in the direction we want it to be.
So is part of your work desiring that we eliminate some of the structure from our man-made existence to feel a little bit more deeply in nature? I love the shot of the Lego headquarters from the top down, right? Because you see it from that aerial perspective, and suddenly I feel my little kid come back into my body again, and I see the blocks and I go, oh, there's something in the way that you're describing it, is that nature reminds us that we are free-formed individuals. We are not necessarily rules-bound, which I think nature has a good reminder for us as innovators. I just came back yesterday from Qatar, and I spent way too much time in the National Museum there, which, also is an Aga Khan award-winning museum. And the entire structure is built, I think it's the first structure of its kind that's built to take the form of, and was built, the materials themselves were built in the same way that sand dunes were formed. And so you have these, they're called desert roses.
The desert roses, exactly. Yeah. No, it looks fabulous.
And it's fascinating. And then all the rules are broken inside the museum because media is projected onto the walls that are curved and sloped, and it's not a screen, right? That is, with hard corners and hard edges, like suddenly, because we don't live our world in hard edges and hard corners, and so I was fascinated by the structure itself and how it held the history of us, and to say we are blowing and we are moving and we are constantly impacted by our environment, be it the desert, the sea, whatever it may be. So for my innovators listening, I think sometimes we are so focused on innovation as it leads to bottom line, innovation as it leads to, a future forward product that can create sustainability from a business concept. But when you think about your own innovative process, how can we inspire other listeners to think about stepping out of the structures that normally constrain us within business, to see that nature is ultimately self-sustaining, right? Unless we as humans kill it. And it has its own way of creating its own extinctions, or what we call, retiring a product, maybe in the larger standpoint. But how does nature continue to inspire you from an innovation standpoint? How do you think about innovating your own business, for example? And is that the role? Like the fact that you have vines growing through your ceiling, right, might be your little tap on the shoulder reminder to nature still innovating around you, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, but I think there's a fundamental around distance. You can say like a city is an experiment in having a large group of people cohabiting a limited amount of space and attempting to orchestrate it in a way, and I mean this both architecturally but also like politically, etc., like orchestrating this in a way so that we maximize the opportunities for each and every individual to unfold their potential the fullest, as long as they do so without inhibiting the same possibilities for everybody else around them, right? So that's kind of the sometimes paradoxical or challenging.
Right. And as a New Yorker, I bump into 14 people a day. Like I consider those 14 people inhibiting my ability to reach my full potential because I got elbowed on the subway.
No, exactly. But and that's also like one thing about nature is that nature is constantly, all the different life forms are competing for resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
sharing resources too.
I think the vine came in here partially to find shade, but then eventually it started going for a little bit of more light in the other side. So it came from the south, and it's now trying to leave in the north, right? But this coexistence ends up reaching towards some kind of equilibrium, and we have to remember that equilibrium is not a static state. It's a dynamic state. When the tightrope walker who seems to be standing still on the rope, on the line, is in fact micro adjusting all the time, because if he would freeze, he would fall.
That's right.
So this idea of understanding that equilibrium is a dynamic state, and understanding that the role is to somehow orchestrate and facilitate this kind of coexistence, that there might be priorities that for a certain building, for the Lego building, allowing visitors to immerse themselves in systematic creativity or creative play or whatever is maybe the primary purpose. But then the building wants to be a good citizen and lend itself to its surroundings. It wants to create and attract life to the city center of Billund, the hometown of Lego. So it ends up that there might be a hierarchy of purposes or performances, but by adding more and more to it, you actually end up enriching the building, the environment, and actually enriching the architecture, the design. The design becomes more beautiful, more interesting, more surprising by trying to by thinking more holistically, and by adding to the list of desired outcomes. Like in some way, I sometimes explain that sometimes it makes our job easier as architects. And you can say one way to describe the job of the architect is to escape the constraints of the tyranny of the standard solution. Because the world definitely has a lot of the same, not very interesting, not very enriching buildings. And the reason that those buildings gets built by the numbers is that they're actually quite good at delivering a certain outcome at a predictable effort and cost. So you can say, like, nothing becomes a standard by being bad. And like even the term like setting a standard is about doing something particularly well or well enough. But then the standard solution ends up delivering this one thing that has been deemed important. And the only way to really escape that constraint, because like no one wants to spend more money than they have to, no one wants to work harder than they have to, is by helping the clients, the city, the users, the future residents or the future inhabitants understand that there are more things to life than this one thing. It's not only about getting X amount of hours of sunlight. You also want to see maybe the view of the river, and you can catch a view of the sunset over there. And you also want to ensure that the ground floor of the city, that you have public oriented programs, so you can make the ground floor active. So it becomes more, and maybe you want to have a mixture of living and working. So there's activity 24/7. so that you don't have empty streets half the time, so it becomes an unsafe environment. There's a lot of additional concerns that will ensure that the building becomes even better at what it is designed for. And somehow it is the job of the architect, the designer, to identify those and solve for them. By making the problem harder to solve, it becomes easier to do something interesting or beautiful. It becomes easier to escape the constraints of the standard solution, because suddenly the standard solution, isn't enough anymore. It doesn't cut the mustard. It doesn't solve for all of these things. It solves only for one thing.
So how do you take that approach? I guess that is the only approach you can take when you're thinking about designing for life on the moon. Yeah, how does this even come to pass? Like, how does this even happen?
No, but the thing is, like, so we're working with NASA and ICON on creating the first human habitat on the moon, and of course you can say it's quite exciting, because they say in creativity there's no tendency that you get less creative with age, but there is a tendency that you get less creative the longer you do the same thing. There's something called skilled incompetence, that you get so good at what you're doing that you already know the answers that you even stop asking the questions, right? So on the moon you have, what is it, 18% gravity, you have near zero atmosphere, you have increased exposure to radiation, you have the day is two weeks long and the night is 2 weeks long. Temperatures fluctuate from like above boiling to way below freezing.
So a typical year in Copenhagen, is that what you're saying? So the long winters and the long summers.
It's definitely a testy environment. So then the last thing is maybe that anything you bring to the moon, you add 4 zeros behind its price tag, because if you take a kilo of cement, let's just say, bring it to the moon, you can just add 4 zeros behind the price tag, because and buildings are heavy. So it's really all about in situ resource utilization. You can say it's almost like an extreme exercise in sustainability, that you want to bring as little as possible, and then you want to use what's there as much as possible. And what do we have on the moon? We have sunlight close to the poles. You have zones where you have 97% sunlight over the year. You have water ice, because again, close to the poles, because the sun comes at such a low angle. In the craters, you have places where you can find ice in the regolith close to the surface, and from that you can get water, and from water you can get hydrogen and oxygen, so you can have essentially energy, breathable air, and drinkable water. And then finally you have moon dust, regolith.
Meant, right?
And that's pretty much all you have. And if you use solar-powered lasers, you can sinter the moon dust into a sort of lunar obsidian. Like in Game of Thrones, they would call it dragon glass.
Yes, I would.
A kind of black glass like rock.
Yeah.
So you can essentially build habitat by laser sintering moon dust into man-made rock.
And windows, in theory, right?
Yeah. With windows, there's a certain purification, so it is glass, and like as it stands now, the results we're getting are a black like obsidian. So we might want to bring the windows from home to start with.
But, yeah, because those are super light. Sure.
but in that sense, you can say it becomes almost like an exercise in resource consciousness. And the funny thing is, we've been working with ICON, the 3D printing company out of Austin, to develop this technology. And because they were using kind of gantry cranes, more like traditional inkjet printers, to print some of the homes we've designed and built on Earth. But because for that you need to level the ground, you need to lay down rails. It's a quite laborious process, and it involves a lot of hardware. So we thought with a single pivot point and an arm, it would be a better, more reliable and more autonomous way to land on the moon and just immediately start building. And the new generation of 3D printers that we're using on Earth, the Phoenix printer, is a direct result of the necessities on the moon. But by having that technology now, we can shorten the print time on Earth, reduce the amount of man hours spent doing. So we can print taller and on more like rugged terrain. So we're creating much more design freedom. We can build taller buildings in more complex sites with a greater morphological freedom and at a lower cost and a higher speed. So ironically, by solving the very difficult problem of building on the moon, as a spin-off, we end up having cheaper, better, faster, higher quality, greater design freedom, housing, and other buildings on Earth. So suddenly, it's not a contradiction. Like a lot of people say, why should we spend any resources on going to the moon when we have struggles here on Earth? And I think the answer is that those extremely difficult problems necessitate innovations that otherwise wouldn't occur.
Yeah. So many of my guests have talked about how constraint breeds the greatest innovation. It's like when you have these harsh parameters that you have to live within, of course, you have more opportunity to think about things in a way. You're forced to think about things in a way you never would have before if it were just easy and flat.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah. That's for sure. Okay, I'm going to ask you the 3 questions I ask every guest to Nordic Visionaries because, I think it's so important. Your perspective is so unique in bringing these talents to the show. I'm so curious, Bjarke, who has inspired you from the Nordics? Authors, designers, environmentalists, even books that you've read. Who's inspired you?
Maybe to mention one, I have a dear friend, Andris Magnusson, who is a writer. One of his most recent books on time and water is a beautiful book, I would say, about his family and about the environmental changes that have occurred in Iceland, the disappearing of the glaciers. And I think especially I go hiking and fishing with him every year in Iceland. And so most of his books, I've heard a lot of the ideas spoken on the long conversations you have when you hike across the sort of volcanic landscapes of Iceland. But one of the main points of, and I'm not going to spoil the book, one of the main points is that once he asked me sort of, when do you think there will no longer be anyone left on Earth that you have loved dearly in your life?
Ouch.
Just like, so how far? Like, and then I'm 50. Darwin and Leo 6 and 1. So let's say I live until I'm, let's say 80 or even 90
or 100.
If I exactly, but if I make some sensible life choices, maybe I have a good shot at 90 at least. That's 40 years into the future. And let's say by then, probably Darwin and Leo, they might have, they might have gotten a boy or a girl. So let's say I have a granddaughter by then, and maybe she's 5 when I pass away, and maybe she lives at least to 100, right? Let's say she lives to 105. We make the math easy. So then that's 140 years into the future. So when she dies, that's someone that I have loved dearly in my lifetime, and that I may have had, that may have influenced me, and that I may have influenced. So, when she dies, she'll think of her grandfather. So that means that I have a close emotional love connection to someone living 140 years into the future. So that's 2,165. So imagine our sense of connection and care and love for the future is not some abstract idea. Like, let's put it this way. The last Blade Runner movie was called 2049. And that was like wild science fiction, right? So
Yeah.
I'm talking about 2165. That's like 115 years after, Ryan Gosling and Ana de Armas in Blade Runner 2000.
Right.
So that just means that our connection to the future is mammalian. It
Mm.
is love. It's not abstract. It's not principles, a sense of ethics, blah, blah. No, it's a love for people that we will love dearly in our lifetimes. So I think that's a game-changing perspective. That is one of the many gifts I've gotten from Andri.
Wow. So when we think about an investment in sustainability, we are thinking about an investment in the love and connection we share with people that we can already visualize living in this loving state with us.
Absolutely.
Wow. Wow. That's fantastic. So I'm curious what you think, having straddled both sides of the Atlantic and many other continents, apparently, Bjarke, when you think about what American listeners can learn from Nordic appreciation of sustainability in nature. I'm curious what comes first to mind for you.
I think it is quite tied to what we've called hedonistic sustainability, the idea that sustainability is not only better for the environment, it actually increases life quality.
Mm.
Because I think the Nordics, we may not be the masters of business innovation or economic value creation, etc. Although we do,
You do a pretty good job.
succeed in many ways,
Yeah.
but I think we're very good at creating quality of life, and often that quality of life is rooted in the enjoyment, the environment, a clean port, a power plant that turns waste into a resource and that is so clean that you can hike and ski on it. When I'm in Copenhagen, I live on a decommissioned car ferry, a Norwegian car ferry, and it's now a great home for the life of my family. But and I can jump in the water, from the deck and climb back again. So I have an enormous swimming pool in the form of the port of Copenhagen. So I think that idea that environmentalism isn't some expensive, let's say, necessary evil. It's actually not only the right thing to do, but it's also the more enjoyable thing to do.
Yeah. And I mean, and the science is bearing this out, right? We know that going for a walk or, even just staring at a tree for 10 minutes almost has the same effect as an antidepressant, right? So we know that it's hedonistic, but it's also healthy. It's giving us back in ways we can't even measure.
Yeah, and half the Copenhageners commute, more than half of the Copenhageners commute by bicycle, and then there's public transportation, the metro, the water taxi, etc. But again, like this idea that the bicycle commute, it's not a moral thing. It's actually because it is faster and more enjoyable to get from A to B on the bicycle. And once in a while, you have to take maybe a car because you need to move some stuff or some
It's
children
pouring.
or whatever. But the bike is the superior choice, especially because it has been baked in. And it's back to this idea of coexistence, that you can say post-war urbanism was so car-centric that everything became dominated by the cars. And cars are still welcome in Copenhagen. It's a quite drivable city, I have to say, because it's also so enjoyable to take the subway and the bicycle or the harbor bus, that people choose it. And by having that kind of coexistence and having a plan for it, you have like bicycle superhighways, you have 2 bridges for cars, but you have 5 or 6 bridges for bikes and pedestrians. You've made it an often superior choice to take the bicycle. So that idea of a kind of holistic, maybe egalitarian planning for coexistence does indeed increase the enjoyment and the quality of life.
Yeah. So my last question is, and if it almost feels like a frivolous question to me for you in particular, because as an architect, you're always thinking in 5 and 10 year increments, right? Because no project gets done tomorrow. And you are the kind of thinker who is already thinking about the moon, right? So this is not a 5 year interval, but I've asked all my other guests, where do you think we should be focusing our attention for the next 5 years when it comes to sustainability and innovation? Where should our minds be focused?
I mean, I think I'm actually like this year, I'm the guest editor of Domus, the almost 100-year-old Italian architecture, design, and art magazine.
Wow,
And,
congratulations.
sorry?
Congratulations.
No, thank you. And so there is a reason it's normally a full-time job, because it is a full-time job. But on that note, so we're doing 11 issues, and we chose the lens of materialism. And trying to recuperate materialism from this kind of negative connotation of empty consumerism, and show that the material worldview could be a way of looking at human society as having been shaped by the materials we have known to harvest and manipulate to create, the world we live in, to accommodate human society. So, and we've gone through it, you could say, chronologically, starting with stone and then earth. And then we go through all the materials. The next one that I have to wrap up in 24 hours is timber. And then,
oh my gosh.
And then we get to fabrics, plastics, living materials, recycled materials, and finally immaterial, all the aspects of design in the world that are not actually anchored in materials. But going through each of the materials, for instance, like concrete, depending on how you measure it, there's a statement that 2 to 4% of global CO2 emissions come from essentially from the making of concrete, which is essentially burning limestone, and that releases CO2 chemically into the atmosphere. So, but I don't think that the future won't have concrete, because it's a great material for 1,000 things. But I do think that we won't make it the way we do it now. And for instance, like there's a group in Boston, like I met the founder, Leah. She found bacteria in caves that digest limestone. So, and by cultivating these bacteria, they're now brewing concrete at room temperature the same way you would brew a beer.
Amazing.
And so without any energy consumption and without any emissions.
Wow.
And of course, the big challenge is to get to scale. Right now, I think they're doing 30 or 40 tons per year. They need to get to 1 million tons to be a real alternative. But what gives me hope is that mankind has found ways to brew a whole lot of beer. I think we will find ways to brew a whole lot of concrete. And I think just going through every single material, it is clear to me that material innovation, because that's really where the emissions and the energy consumption comes from.
True.
And I think that's also, like, in a way, if something is a big part of the problem today, it's because it has the potential to be an incredible part of the solution.
Yeah, and fascinating, right? That the way that we go back to figure out how to make it right is to find the solution that nature already created, that was happening all along. And us dopey humans just took a long time to find it, right? But
no, exactly.
That is already happening. So I'm calling on all my German entrepreneurs here to get the word out, the Braumeister, like for all of the brewers out there. All of the ancient techniques of making beer, however long it's been made in all cultures, come to the table and help us make concrete that doesn't kill the planet. That's fantastic. Bjarke, it's been such a fantastic conversation with you today. If people want to get in touch to help you design their next building on Mars or Venus or Jupiter, or maybe even here on this big blue marble Earth, where should they get in contact with you?
Yeah, well, our website is BIG, like Bjarke Ingels Group, BIG.DK as in Denmark.
Okay.
So, and we would love to collaborate. I'd love to help.
Yeah, and you will get lost in the pictures as I did in all these beautiful buildings that you've constructed. Bjarke, thank you so much for joining me on Nordic Visionaries today. Truly a Nordic visionary for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A pleasure.